Hello, and welcome to another Pirkei Avot text explication video with me, Rabbi Drew. We are now on the 19th, that's right, 19th text in the 5th chapter. And just as we have seen with all the previous 18 texts, they are all anonymously taught. There are no sages, no rabbis, no one's names attached to them. That's about to disappear because we are going to, in the next several, just a heads up, the next several ones will have names, just like we'd seen predominate throughout the first 4 chapters of Pirkei Avot. Now, let's get into this. This text, this 19th text in the 5th chapter, has an interesting setup. A lot of the texts that we have seen structured are in a 4-part, sometimes a 3-part structure. This one is interestingly set up in sort of a 7-part structure. But really, we could see it as a 4-part structure with a punctuation and then a conclusion of 2 parts, which is a lot simpler. And this, as we'll see, is a very bifurcated text. Let's get into it. Kol mi sheyesh biyado shlosha devarim halalu mitalmidav shel Avraham Avinu. Everybody or anybody who possesses 3 things, they are amongst the students of Abraham, our father. Now, Abraham, if you remember, is from the book of Genesis. Abraham is not only just in the book of Genesis, but he is basically considered the progenitor of our people. He is the father of Isaac. Isaac is the father of Jacob. Jacob is the father of the various tribes from whom we all descend. So that's basically it. He is basically considered the progenitor of our people, and more importantly, not just from a biological standpoint, but I would actually argue more importantly from a sort of a moral standpoint. One could even say a spiritual standpoint, but certainly from a moral and ethical standpoint, he really is considered the sort of at the forefront, being really, the head, the early, well, he's called Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, because he's not just a biological father, but also a spiritual and, more importantly, moral figure for our people. Contrasted with, here's the second line, Shlosha Devarim Ha'acherim Mitamidav Shel Bilam Harasha. And anybody who has in their own hand these other 3 things are amongst the students of Bilam the wicked. Now, Bilam is from the book of Numbers. Bilam he was hired really by Balak to curse the Jewish people, and despite his many attempts and the many riches thrown his way, he ended up inadvertently blessing the Jewish people many times. But he is still nevertheless considered Harasha, at least by the rabbis. He is never actually mentioned in the book of Numbers as specifically wicked, although it's implied, but the rabbis really applied that. Just as they call Abraham is never called Avinu, our father, in the book of Genesis, so too Bilam is never called Harasha in the book of Numbers. These are basically moral value judgments that the rabbis are placing on both Abraham, basically our moral father, as well as the wickedness of Bilam. They're placing that value judgment on him from the book of Numbers. Okay, now that we have that, there are 3 things that are from Abraham and 3 things from Bilam. What are these 3 things? Here we go. Ayin tova v'ruach nemucha v'neshesh shvala mitamidav shel Avraham Avinu. So the 3 traits that are amongst Abraham Avinu are a good eye, a humble spirit, and a moderate appetite. These 3 things. Conversely, Ayin ra v'ruach gvoha v'nefesh rechava mitamidav shel Bilam Harasha. Now, to be considered amongst the students of Bilam Harasha, the wicked, would be a bad eye, a haughty spirit, and a limitless appetite. Now, that's interesting. I do. The first thing I want to point out is I'm not really sure exactly the translation of. So we have these 3 things, but this third thing, v'nefesh falav or nefesh rechava. It's interesting because what does this mean? A nefesh? Does this mean like a spirit? Does this mean one's own body? It would almost seem to be like a sort of more of a humble body and more of a wide body. It's an interesting translation. I just want to point out the translation that I'm using here is talking about a moderate appetite and a limitless appetite. I have some skepticism towards that translation, but certainly, let's point out for the second piece, I'm just going to go in reverse order. For the second one, that is V'ruach Nemucha, V'ruach Gvoha, so either a more humble spirit or a haughty spirit. Those certainly play off really well, and I think definitely speak to sort of the moral and ethical goodness that Abraham brings, that we should strive to have a more humble spirit, and then those of a more haughty attitude, more haughty spirit would be more considered to be like those students of Bilam the wicked. The first of these is an ayin tova or an ayin ra. What does this mean, a good eye and a bad eye? Well, it's not exactly clear from this. I will say it's not the first time we've encountered these terms in Pirkei Avot. Now, the first time we ever encountered these was also kind of in tandem, sort of the opposite sides of the same coin. We first encountered them in the second chapter when Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his 5 students, what is a good path that one should seek to cleave to, and conversely, what is a bad path that one should seek to avoid? And Rabbi Eliezer, one of his prime students, answered, ayin tova, ayin ra. A good eye is something that someone should seek to cleave to, and an ayin ra is something that one should seek to avoid. So that is the first time we've encountered not just this term, but really both sides of this coin, both a good eye and a bad eye. We subsequently also encountered it earlier in this 5th chapter, where it discussed the 4 types of different tzedakah givers, the 4 types of those who give charity. And we have one who gives charity but does not want others that they should give charity, that puts a bad eye upon others. And then also the person who thinks that others should give but not themselves giving charity or tzedakah, that is a bad eye to that person. So we have seen that it's actually kind of, I'll be honest, kind of unclear here what this good eye, bad eye means. I really actually don't know myself. It could be, I really don't know. If you have a sense of what this is, I really don't know the good eye, bad eye piece of it. I mean, there's no context to the way that Rabbi Eliezer uses it in the second chapter. We at least have a little bit more of a context of the time that it's used earlier in this chapter, where it talks about sort of maybe opinion. It could be an opinion, or sort of the way that one perceives, right? Because you use your eye to perceive things. So it's a little bit unclear. But certainly for the second of these 3 things, as far as an attitude, whether or a spirit, but whether you're humble or haughty, those are flips of it, and the appetite's unclear. But certainly, whatever each of these things mean specifically, overall, it's sort of the more bad characteristics are more of Bilam the wicked, and the more positive of Abraham, our father, are to be lauded. Okay. Now those are the sort of the opening 4-part structure. Now we get an interrupting interrogative. We have a question that pops up. What is the difference between the disciples of Abraham our father and those of Bilam the wicked? Now we're going to have specific examples, and really that's actually quite similar to what we have encountered in the previous few texts, where it would state basically these nice things, and but we need really examples to really get us. They were nice abstractions, but now we needed concrete examples, and that's what we're going to see now as well. The disciples of Abraham our father, so Talmidav shel Avraham Avinu, the disciples of Abraham our father, ochlim ba'olam hazeh v'nochlim ba'olam haba, that they eat in this world and they inherit the world to come. Shnei Amar, as it says from the book of Proverbs, Lanchil oavei yesh v'osro teham amalei, that I will endow those who love me with substance, I will fill their treasuries. And that's from the 8th chapter of the book of Proverbs. But Aval Tamidav shel Bilam harasha, but the disciples of Bilam the wicked, Yorshin Gehinom V'yordim Lever Shachat, that they inherit Gehinom, and they descend to the nethermost pit. It's basically bad stuff, and really more thinking about the afterlife. And actually, that's what we see in both of these pieces, that which is actually interesting, because the Ochlim Bo'olam Hazeh, the disciples of Abraham, of our father, eating in this world, meaning they're benefiting from what they do in this world, and they also inherit the world to come. That's great. Meanwhile, those who don't, those who follow Bilam's path, that they descend to Gehinnom, or they inherit Gehinnom, and they descend to this nethermost pit. Okay, and what's the verse that they use? Shne'amar, Vata Elohim toridim liv'er shachat anshe damim umirma lo yechatzu yimehem va'ani eftach bach. For you, O God, will bring them down to the nethermost pit, those murderous and treacherous men. They shall not live out half their days, but I trust in you, from Psalms 55. Okay. Interesting. One thing that really strikes out to me is almost this need to point out the afterlife here and benefiting. And what's really fascinating is that who stands to benefit is clearly those who are on more of a upright, moral, and ethical path, and those who are certainly to descend are those on the reverse. Although, I think we can all agree, we've all seen it, we've all experienced it. That's not always the way that we perceive it in our lives. That's not the way we perceive it in the world around us. Because what we perceive often is, why do the wicked get rewarded? Why do the wicked enjoy this life and the righteous suffer? That is a very common experience. And trying to figure this out there's a fancy word called theodicy. And people attempt these attempts at theodicy, trying to make sense of this. Why do the wicked seem to prosper in this world and the righteous suffer? Well, maybe, as it says here, maybe it's actually, no, the righteous do get enjoyment in this world and the world to come, and ultimately what you don't see is that the wicked or those who are on a bad path do actually ultimately suffer in the world to come. Or they actually don't even make it to the world to come. That's for the righteous. They actually go down and descend into nethermost pits. So I think that's really what's going on here is not just the way that one should accord oneself in this world. It's a good thing, and more than just being a good thing, there's actually a next worldly reward to come, or punishment. So that's what's going on in this text. Really interesting to see Abraham and Bilam being contrasted here by the rabbis in this, once again, anonymously taught text here in the 5th chapter. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was insightful, and I hope you stay tuned for further such textual explorations. Thank you so much for watching.